live streamed. Live from Imperial Muscalandia, this is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Our guest tonight is John Lebkowski. And the not ready for cable news player is here. Me,
I'm here.
the designated old guy, Scoop Sweeney. Hey, John.
You are designated, and you're old.
I give old a bad name, I think. Anyway, I understand you brought along your slideshow.
I have a slideshow that we can go over. I suppose that first I should go over and share this link somewhere. Let's see.
We believe in sharing here. We're a user-friendly kind of show. We like to just let people actually know how they can watch it, listen.
Sing something while I'm doing this.
Sing it. Well, I could play our new theme song, but I don't know if that'd get us in trouble with the copyright folks. So we're going to Senior City.
I don't know about the copyright folks. I've heard a lot of interesting theories about copyright lately.
Yes, and I'm sure they vary wildly. There's so many people with different opinions of what's real and what's copyrightable and what's not. And I just don't want to think about it. It gives me a headache.
Let's see. So I am going to slideshow.
John is trying to navigate the settings there. Those of you keeping score. So
there
far,
you go.
He scores 100%. There he is. He got it going. There we are. The future of does the internet have a future, John? I mean, it was on the way out. It was going to be
the internet will have a future, but that comes later.
I thought the internet was going to be replaced by sock puppet shows or something like that. Or is everything just going to be made up?
I would welcome a few sock puppet shows at this point. No, the future of the internet is a presentation that I gave in several versions over several years. And I believe this is the original version. I dug back into my presentation archives and found multiple sets of slides. There's one set of slides that is called The History of the Future of the Internet. And I decided not to use those. I decided to go back to the oldest set of slides that I had, which I believe I created around 2010. So this would be the first version of this presentation. And by going through this presentation, we can talk about what has come to be that was predicted. And, sort of how things may have been a little bit off.
We can talk about what hath Zuckerberg wrought.
But, the first thing is, as you can see in this particular image, the internet of the 1950s, as envisioned in the 1950s.
Moms buying their boys clothes on the TV set.
Yeah, she's having an interactive conversation with someone, and she's holding a microphone, sort of like this microphone. And it looks very much like a 1950s appliance, including the screen.
I am very much in keeping with the 50s liberated woman look that has the apron there. And of course, she's in the kitchen. Women didn't go outside the kitchen in the 50s, did they?
She borrowed that apron from her husband.
I've got my own apron.
So in talking about the future, one of the things I like to point out is that in various movies and depictions of the future early on, fashions were um, sort of oddly predicted. As for instance, there was a movie called Things to Come, which was made in the 30s, and it was about the far future, way off in the 1960s. And they showed people in the 1960s wearing these very odd sort of robe kind of outfits. I mean, they were very futuristic looking. But we all know that in the 60s, people were wearing jeans and t-shirts. So that prediction was way off. And many predictions of the future are way off because people don't so much predict the future as they fantasize about the future.
It's the future they wish they had, and they know probably won't arrive looking anything like their dreams.
Exactly.
One predictor of the future that I found to be pretty close in a lot of ways was the old TV series Max Headroom.
Oh, yeah.
About television and how it was going to rule the world and the ballot box and everything in between. And I watched some of that stuff again. I have it on.
So what's television?
Television. It's this box that kind of has a screen that you look to, has warm moving colors and makes
Is it anything like streaming video?
No. They usually are way more. It's way more boring, and they've got a lot less choice. The choices are being made by some guy in New York. Oh, the internet map. Oh,
So there was an internet mapping project, and this particular map I've put up here was one that was drawn by Kevin Kelly, who at one time was the editor of Wired magazine and was a friend of mine. And Kevin sort of drew the internet that he knew at the time, and you see that YouTube is much bigger on this particular drawing than Twitter or Facebook or various other applications. Blogs are huge, and the cloud is not that big. Huh?
Says E-Trade is out in the sticks there, so it wasn't doing too well, I guess.
Well, and is it now? You don't hear much about E-Trade. You look off into the mountains and you see the Usenet forums off in a cave. And then you see Web 2.0 is sort of like having a futuristic landscape above it. And Web 3.0 is off in a kind of dither over there. It's like way over on the left. You kind of don't know what that's about. And then there's IRC chat rooms at the top of the peak and Chinese chat rooms way off to the left.
Pirate Bay looks impressive.
Pirate Bay.
That didn't go well.
I believe that Pirate Bay no longer exists, that they were busted at some point. Or Pirate Bay was a lot of people won't even know what we're talking about, but Pirate Bay was a site where links were shared to content that was copyright. So they were basically infringing copyright like crazy there. You could download movies and you could download music and so forth. And BitTorrent was an application that facilitated the distribution of content in ways that were hard to track. So, and there it was sort of like spread out and distributed, and it was like things were being shared through all kinds of paths, so that it was hard to like track down exactly where it was coming from.
That was the beta version of the dark web.
Yeah, I mean, so BitTorrent allowed people to download these things, and it was theoretically hard to track them down. What eventually happened was that a lot of the internet service providers would throttle BitTorrent downloads if they saw them. I mean, they could see a BitTorrent process working and they would just throttle it. So there was quite a backlash, of course, from content providers against things like Pirate Bay and BitTorrent. But, part of the reason that people used things like that was convenience. It wasn't that people didn't want to pay for their content. It was just that there wasn't a convenient way for them to do it, But now we have streaming music sites where you pay a flat rate and stream all the music you want to. And we have ways to watch movies on demand, and sometimes you pay for them, or sometimes you get them as part of a flat rate free service. So really the convenience is there now, but you do pay for it.
Well,
and I don't think, go ahead.
Convenience is a little bit too much. You have internet that comes and hits you whether you want it to or not. All those nifty notifications and things chase you around the internet.
Well, I mean, you pay for it one way or another. I want you to notice that while YouTube is fairly large there, Netflix is tiny. And Amazon ain't that big. Google's relatively small. AOL and Yahoo are listed over there. They do appear to be shrinking there. Well, they practically, I don't even think AOL exists anymore. Well, no, I think there is still an AOL, but it's not much. And Yahoo's not much anymore. Blogs are pretty much, they're not non-existent, but it's not like it was back then. Now, when you think about blogging, you think about people doing Medium or Substack. There are platforms for blogging that among other things, can allow people to pay for the content. If you want people to pay for your blog content, then if they would do it, they often won't do it unless you're insanely popular. And there are some people who make a lot of money with, for instance, Substack, and set up. It's essentially a blog, but it's distributed as a newsletter as well. So Substack, I think, refers to itself as a platform for newsletters, but all of those newsletters are stored as blog posts as well.
I've seen some of those that they should be paying me to read them.
Exactly. I'm trying to see whether there's anything else interesting on here. Games are very small on here. Skype, you see Skype over there. You don't see Zoom on here at all. Zoom really was not a thing back then. So there you are. So here is a cartoon by Tom Tomorrow. It says, if real life were more like the internet. And, there's several situations described here that I don't know that they've changed all that much. Attention will be considered an acceptable substitute for money is still a very big one. People are basically trading you content for your attention to ads that they serve you. And the reason I'm hesitating here is because, I've got a bar in front of the print at the top, but random strangers would have very strong opinions about your every slightest move. There you are. That's what we call Twitter. A disproportionate number of people would be unfamiliar with the concept of empathy. Yeah, we have that to some extent. People tend to be pretty nasty to each other online. In some cases, maybe not as a rule. Everyone would expect everything to be free. Well, see, that's changed quite a bit. It's no longer the case that people expect things to be free online because we have more and more paywalls going up, more and more ways to pay for things. Micropayments have made that much easier. Oh, and then in that last box, and everywhere you went, you'd be deluged with inexplicably inappropriate offers. Well, if anything, that's amplified. Oh, let's see what's going on here. There we go. So here's another, it's kind of like a map or a diagram that I thought was pretty interesting. Semantic web plus social web plus human creativity equals serendipity enhancement. And this has a number of things that people were talking about, including right there in the middle, the noosphere. And the noosphere is a concept that was at least amplified by Teilhard de Chardin. I think it came from another source, and he talked about it. But it was, it's sort of like the idea of a sphere of knowledge that forms around the planet. The idea that if you get all the minds to sort of connect and synchronize, and the internet was supposed to do that. Well, I would say that is not exactly the way it's played out.
They connected, but you didn't.
They ain't synchronized.
All those minds connecting.
So I'm trying to see what else might be interesting on here. Productivity enhancement for society and government. Well, I don't know. There may have been some enhancement of productivity, but there's been some, what would you call it, de-enhancement as well?
I don't know, but whatever it was, it didn't work out well.
And there's that part about e-democracy. Well, how's that going for you? Yikes. So this thing says now, and I can't remember why I used now back then when I created this thing. I think that this was pretty much the state of things at the time, and that's why I said that. But broadband, we were getting higher speeds. We were starting to have broadband. There was more adoption of the internet. This thing that says everything is miscellaneous, really the point I was making there is that you could find all kinds of things online, and you could find them with search. And that thing that says, I feel lucky, that came from the old version of Google search, where they would, you would enter a search term and you could click to get a number of search results. But if you clicked, I feel lucky, they would serve you one thing, they would pick the result for you. And they stopped doing that eventually.
I thought you were channeling Clint Eastwood or something. Do you feel lucky?
You feel lucky.
Are you going to get what you were looking for? I like the fact you have Skype on there. Skype was our original tool when we formed the Plutopia News Network.
It was.
That point in time.
Well, Skype has, for many things, has been replaced by Zoom. So now we would say Zoom versus distance. But the whole idea was, relatively inexpensive, very sort of immediate communication. And back then, I think Skype was still pretty much one-to-one. It was later that we started seeing platforms for multiple people to come together in an environment like this, like what we're doing right now. We used Google Hangout for that for a long time, but Hangout was not quite as good as Zoom technically. It was laggy at times. Sometimes there would be technical issues. Zoom can be laggy at times too, and sometimes have technical issues, but more so with Google Hangout.
Yeah, Skype was pretty good actually, until some guy named Gates bought it out and turned it into a Microsoft product, and kind of went downhill from there.
Is that the same guy who implanted a chip in me when I got vaccinated?
Yeah, I think that was probably that explains a lot about you, John. There, we've been working on your chip implant.
So the next thing on here,
a chip.
The next thing on here is about broadcast, and really, it was that television was going to be challenged by Hulu and BitTorrent and Netflix, and definitely Hulu and Netflix have become essential television platforms. I personally use Hulu for the same things I used to use cable for or satellite for. Hulu Live does that now. So you can cut the cord and you can if you have access to broadband, at least you can use Hulu as your source of programming primarily. But then there's a bunch of other applications. So you can get Netflix, and it has an incredible amount of content.
There's some Amazon Prime,
and there's HBO Max. There's Peacock. There's Disney Plus.
There's BritBox if you want the British TV shows.
So, basically what's happened is that we've been moving away from television as something that is served originally over the air and then over cable or satellite. And now it's being served over the internet, and it's application based. You buy applications, and those applications give you access to some amount of content, and some, there might be a theme to it, or maybe it's a particular, like what we used to call a network, like NBC has Peacock now. So you can get a lot of the NBC programming through Peacock, but you can also get, because Universal and NBC are connected, you can get a lot of like Universal films on Peacock.
Same thing with a lot of network programming. Basically, the old networks have seen the writing on the wall, and they know that they're pretty much doomed, so they'd better join up or get out of town.
It's true. And then after that, there's the politics part of it, grassroots adhocracies and the Tea Party, basically talking about people starting to come together online and facilitation of more or less populist movements, that there were more ways for the grassroots to bubble up, and what we didn't really realize was that this was going to open the door to our slide into fascism. But, that wasn't obvious at the time. At the time, it looked like it might be a good thing. This would be more democratic. And in fact, maybe it was more democratic. But if you're going to be totally democratic, then you got to be careful who your majority is going to vote for. And then again, if you have a system that can be gamed, maybe the minority can take power.
That's kind of what's been happening. Everybody gets a chance to get their say out there, but those aren't always the progressive folk that they were dreaming about back at that time. It was a lot of other folks as well, the QAnon boys and girls.
And we didn't quite see the internet or the various applications on the internet would become like a petri dish for propaganda. Like what happened with Facebook. And I certainly didn't realize how susceptible to propaganda people might be, and how effective the organizing of a particular political movement could be online.
Yeah, John, how much do you think the COVID lockdown contributed to that acceleration of the craziness out there? I mean, things were crazy beforehand.
It was really pretty crazy already. Yeah,
they really put their foot on the gas and sped away with it when everybody was locked down with nothing better. They couldn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, our life moved online to a greater extent. That's true. The one other thing that was starting to appear then, like in 2005, you didn't have this. You didn't have smartphones or anything like that. But by 2010, you had, as I say, the world in your pocket. You'd have a smartphone that could give you access to pretty much anything online. And you also had the potential of having, I say, augmented reality here. Sometimes we talk about mixed reality, which is augmented and virtual reality. Augmented reality, it kind of depends on how you define it. sort of how far it's come along, but it really is kind of a thing. It's like being in a particular space and having an enhanced view of it through the intelligence of your smart device. Excuse me. I'm having trouble. There we are. Hold on. Okay. So, and at the time that I created this, 66% of adults had broadband connections. That's a decade ago, right? A little over a decade ago. And I just checked today, and in 2019, that number was up to 70.8%. So it's not growing really fast. That's broadband. Now, internet access is much more. I mean, it's over 90%. Most people have access to it. I think there's like 7% of the people who don't have any internet access. And I'm not sure who those people are. Actually, and digging around today, I saw but did not read. I saw that there was an article that talks about this 7%. And I'd like to go back and find it. It's like, who are these people who don't have any internet access at all? And we're talking about the US there. Of course, it's variable throughout the world, but in many parts of the world, cellular is the thing. People have cell phones. They may not have any other way to access the internet, but they do have that. So there's widespread availability of internet connectivity now.
This country, internet access in rural areas is still a hit and miss proposition, mainly because the big providers really don't want to spend the money to run the cables out there or whatever distribution system they use.
It's broadband access that they don't have. They might have dial-up or whatever.
Yeah, dial-up is out there, but I mean, you don't. I remember dial-up, and it was not real good for any of the stuff that we were doing with broadband now.
Right, and you'll see on this slide that at the time I did this, a majority of Americans didn't believe that affordable broadband was a major government priority. But clearly now it's considered a priority, and it was included in the infrastructure bill that they just passed. And that's all about getting broadband to people who can't access it now, and that's mostly rural. And one way that is likely to happen is through this Starlink thing that Elon Musk is building, assuming that it comes off and that it works. If you had a satellite system that could deliver really effective broadband, that could solve the problem. It's definitely a significant infrastructure problem. You could lay fiber optics to rural areas, but to really get broad coverage, it could be pretty expensive. There'd be a lot of work involved getting that out there. Google used to talk about putting internet points of access on balloons and floating those, but I think that project eventually died.
There have been so many different ideas that someone had that we're going to get everybody internet access, and everybody will have broadband. And Starlink, sounds good. I mean, but what was it, like $99 a month for if you wanted to get a trial access? And there's a lot of people that won't pay that. But
that's true. I mean, it's a tough problem. It's a tough problem getting it out to making it pervasive.
Yeah. And how resilient is it in something like a solar flare? We just had a giant solar flare that really did mess with a lot of satellites.
I don't know. It didn't affect broadband.
Well,
but Starlink, it might. I see your point. Okay, so I have a slide here where I talk about the effects of the internet, one of which is the network effect. This is a significant deal. Facebook is what it is today because they managed to get network effect. In other words, they got a critical mass of people onto their system. And, eventually email didn't make a whole lot of sense because so few people had it. But if everybody has these email, it becomes exponentially more useful and productive. So it's an adoption thing. If you have substantial adoption of some network service, then it becomes more and more valuable as more people adopt it. And it becomes more conducive to group farming broadly. Downside of this effect is a potential deluge of information that is actually useful.
And not useful. Think of spam.
That's the next bullet point. Useless information, spam and noise. But it's an important point to know that useful information can still be unmanageable if there's so much of it. So the question is, how can you filter? And different people filter differently. And one effect of that has been that we no longer have the sense of everybody sort of having the same reality. If you had 3 television networks and a few news services, a limited number of newspapers delivering news, then people were kind of getting the same story and on the same page. But now you got people who are deluged with information. They're filtering that information, and they're also filtering through different sets of biases. So we have a kind of a chaotic and polarizing situation now. And we also have this problem of useless information, as you say, all the spam and noise. And then, of course, money changes everything. The more money has come into it. I mean, we were very idealistic early on, and we had this sort of everywhere free internet, and everybody had access to whatever information, well, not whatever information they needed, but at least whatever information they needed that was available online, they could get it, and they could usually get it without having to pay anything for it. But now we have systems where either you have to pay through a paywall, like you pay directly for it, or you pay with your attention by looking at ads. So here's some scenarios about, at the time I was saying, here's some ways the internet could go. It could be, as it had early on been envisioned, a free and open network of networks, end-to-end delivery of information, which meant, talking about it being the dumb network, you didn't have any kind of filters or constraints in there. Everything could go from one point to another without being mucked with in any way. And another idea is that the internet becomes more like cable television, where you have kind of more limited selections that are delivered with a high quality of service and a relatively high barrier to entry on the content side. In other words, it's hard to get your stuff into the frameworks for serving it to people. And then this last one is like a balkanized hybrid of walled gardens and paywalls, plus really low bandwidth, lower value, everything else. So you would pay for a higher quality of service. But if you couldn't pay for it, you would get a lower quality of service. And that's, sort of like people pay a lot for broadband access and then for various services that provide content to them. But we still do have sites that are relatively low bandwidth, and easier to access in a sense. There is a question of whether there was always this issue of whether services would pay to make themselves more accessible, easier to access. The idea was that you would have some parts of the network would be like superhighways. So maybe Netflix or Facebook comes over the superhighways delivered through really fast pipes, but that other parts would be like rural roads. It would be like you're relegated to much slower paths through the network. And I don't think we've exactly got there. I think you still pretty much get a uniform speed of access, though I'm not sure about that. I'm not a network guy myself. I've spent a lot of time around people who work with networks, and it would be worthwhile to talk to somebody about that sometime, about what really is the state of the network now. Originally, the internet was conceived as just a peering system where a bunch of different networks were connected to each other. That's why they call it internetworking or internet. And it was, pretty egalitarian, and your content would go from hop to hop through the network. So you would have like a network address for some piece of content, and it could be accessed through a path through the internet that was handled by the technology itself. It would sort of like try to find the optimum path to whatever it is you're trying to access, pull it back to you. But we've evolved a system where there are like fatter pipes that are like big backbones, and those are provided by bigger companies, and as I say, people will really pay for higher quality of service. I know I pay a lot of money for broadband internet access. So this is like kind of talking about the point. This Chris Boyd, my friend Chris Boyd, who is a network guy and really knows a lot about it. And he started describing how that works. You like engine G, your ISP has a deal with engine B. Engine B pays the ISP to degrade network capacity to engine G, making them almost unusable, while B's results fly back. That's kind of what I was describing there. I don't think we ever got to that, but that was always a possibility. And that could be any like service or set of services there. You notice MySpace is listed there. MySpace kind of didn't hang around very much. Oops, got ahead of myself. And then there was the idea of having a neutral network where everybody had sort of like equal access to it. And we used to make the point that to have something like Facebook, you needed to have this neutral network so that people who were like innovative entrepreneurs could invent for the platform and could easily launch and get their stuff out there. I don't think we're as much like that now. I think it's becoming harder and more expensive to launch applications and services online. And part of it is also the cost of just getting the attention.
Yeah, there have been many attempts at trying to do a better version, and no one seemed to have the capital to actually do that. It's an expensive project if you're going to compete with Mr. Zuckerberg and his buddies.
Well, the real problem there too is the network effect that I mentioned before. There are so many people who are on Facebook that makes it extremely valuable, and it makes it hard to leave if I pretty much everybody I know has a Facebook account. There have been a few outliers that dropped off, but all these people are on Facebook, and I know I can access everybody there. Hard for me to leave. Plus, we as Plutopia News Network, we use Facebook a lot to let people know what we're up to, and to build our audience. And we're not the only ones. So if you try to start something new, you have a limited number of users on there. And if I can only access on this new system a fraction of the people that I can access through Facebook, I'm not going to be committing as much of my time there. So Facebook and Twitter both have significant network effect, and it's hard to compete with that. And one of the things that we've talked about is how this is really based on how they have, let's say Facebook has a sort of monopoly on the users, the actual users and their data. So the question is whether you could have a system that was built that could access the same users and the same data without them having to go to very much effort. You just sort of access everybody through any system. So the idea, the way I always saw it was move all of the data, the users and their data, move them into some central space, and then let many applications access them, so that once you set up an application, everybody who is on Facebook could also be on that or accessible through that application. And Cory Doctorow talks about a concept of adversarial interoperability, which would mean, in other words, competitors to Facebook having Facebook access to the same data that Facebook has. So, you might require Facebook to create an API, an application programming interface, so that other systems could acquire their users and data. And that might be a kind of regulation, and that would be what you call you have interoperability there. It's not to Facebook's advantage, so that's why we call it adversarial interoperability. So that may be one way to foster competition. That might be a potential antitrust action.
A lot of people are trying that route, especially in the European Union. They have done a lot more as far as trying to, rein in Facebook and their usage of data. And, we are somewhat less successful in this country.
Well, something's going to happen. It's clear. Who knows what? There are a lot of issues and there are a lot of opinions. And there are a lot of interests in play. Here's another scenario, set of scenarios about applications. So one scenario is there's many distributed sites, platforms, and applications, open architectures, and data portability. Well, we don't so much have that now as far as open architectures and data portability. There was movement in that direction at times in the evolution of the internet, but we really do have a lot of things that are more locked down now. And then mobile and targeted applications, we do have that on our devices especially. And that's kind of where what we used to think of as television is going, where you have a bunch of applications like, say you've got an Apple TV or an Amazon Fire Stick or something like that. It has a bunch of applications on it. They give you access to various forms of content. And that's sort of like the channels that you had in cable television, or, I can remember a time when you put an antenna up outside and accessed your television signal through the air. It didn't come through a pipe of any kind. But that was a long time ago in a galaxy far away.
That was back when the FCC actually required broadcasters to be fair and equitable in their distribution and in their programming and their policies. And that's not happening anymore.
Now here's another one: recasting the stockpile of information in usable form. Basically, and this is kind of like a semantic web kind of thing, the idea of getting more and more data into a form that it can be used by various applications. And especially if you can build data sets that can be highly interoperable. And then curated information experience to have machines filter and present content. Well, here's an example of that: Apple News or Google News. These are two news applications that use algorithms to select a curated, like personalized information experience for the user. So I have Apple News, I have Google News, and the algorithms have been entrained on me somewhat, and they serve me information that they think I want to see. That has some downsides. I mean, there's the concept of the filter bubble, where you only see what you agree with, which is not necessarily a good thing. But this is definitely something that has evolved a lot since 2010.
Well, the whole Apple News thing, I haven't bought into Apple News. They keep trying, though. On my new iPad, I'm constantly getting pinged by Apple News with this great news story that I know they've been scouring what I'm looking at, and they go, "Oh, let's see if we can lure old Sweeney in with this story," and they'll pop up all sorts of notifications, and it just strikes me personally as a little creepy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they're not really serving you any ads, right? They're just trying to give you a good experience as part of their overall product. And in my case, I pay a little extra for what they call Apple News Plus, and I get a bunch of, like, essentially magazines in digital format. I could pay a lot of money to subscribe to those things individually, but no, I can just read them in Apple News. So it has value, and I do have some concerns about the curation and the extent to which I can affect it. And I would really like to be able to have a little more control over it than I do now. Though there are some, you'll have some preferences you can set and that sort of thing, but it's minimal.
I think the reason I have avoided Apple News, just the whole Apple way of doing things rubs me the wrong way. It was not quite that way when Jobs was still around, but the new administration seems to really want to enforce their view of the world, whether you like it or not. And
I don't know. I haven't really had that feeling, but what do I know?
Yeah,
I'm probably just being led along.
Well, they love to do things like, enforce their no self-repair policies, which they finally had to kind of let loose on.
Yeah, they're backing off on that.
Well, that whole thing, that's a little tacky.
We just sick Cory Doctorow on them. He'll fix that.
If you can't make products that last forever, then let people fix them when they break. God.
Yeah. That's for sure. And this last thing here is Facebook and Google rule. Well, that is kind of the way it is right now. And people are filtering and finding and presenting content with help from search tools. That's been an evolving thing, and it's pretty well established right now. And I know I use Google a lot. I don't know what I would do without Google search. And I do that knowing that Google knows a lot about me. No person at Google knows a lot about me, but the machines at Google have stored information about me that allows them to serve me, for instance, ads in certain contexts. They know me pretty well. I don't really worry. That doesn't bother me very much. I know it bothers some people.
Well, the thing that's interesting about Google and Facebook is they have both changed the parent company's name. Now we have Alphabet and Meta. And that is an old salesman trick. It's like if you're starting to get a lot of bad press, you change the name to Fred's News Service instead of whatever. Just, it's
Let's hold that in reserve. We may need to change our name to Fred's News Service.
Whatever. As long as we're having fun with it.
Scooporama.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, what happened there? Oh, there we go.
Said my name and it responded.
This is just like showing the various protocols and protocol layers for the internet and some of the application protocols for things like Telnet and FTP and so forth, which is just geek stuff, basically. And then the TCP layers, the application layer, at the top, and then transport layer, like for transporting data information, internet layer, internetworking, and then link layer. And then we add another layer at the top, the Facebook layer. And that was, I think the point I was making there is that eventually the way people experienced the internet was going to be through some application, and it was probably going to be Facebook. So by 2010, we could sort of see that coming, and really it is sort of like that now. There are a lot of people whose experience of the internet is through Facebook. And one of the messages of this, I'm not like an expert on the technology, the layers and so forth. But what I do understand is that the applications that use the internet are not the internet. So there are various things that leverage the internet, but they aren't the internet. And you shouldn't get them confused, and you should understand that there's a much larger possibility space than you realize if your only experience is through something like Facebook. And that's it.
Wow, you made it in record time.
I got through it. And this, so I originally created this when we were Plutopia Productions back in, like I say, 2010. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly where I can't remember all of the places that I've given this talk. I've given, I think I had some earlier Future of the Internet talks. I recall once going in and giving the talk to a meeting of IEEE guys. I think it was an IEEE project managers meeting, maybe. Anyway, it was a lot of old tech guys. And we got really hung up on talking about the early technologies that were commonly used for leveraging the internet, things like file transfer protocol or FTP and Telnet, and, Usenet for conversations of the kind that you may find now more readily on Reddit, or, I've been a member of the Well. The Well has been around since 1985, and the Well was originally on a standalone computer, inaccessible to the internet. And then they connected to the internet, which made it easier for people like me who were not in the Bay Area where the Well, was set, to access it. And, now the Well has members from all over the place, and you don't think very much about access. You just do it through the web.
Yeah, sometimes I get a little wistful for the days of all those interesting little apps that are network things that were happening in the early days of the internet. Yeah, things like going to news groups. That was a lot of fun. If you wanted something, you could probably find a group that was, talking your language or your whatever your interest was. Yeah, everything was a lot slower and clunkier. Yeah, I started doing my internet broadcasting stuff using real networks, real audio thing, which meant I had to go and pre-record it and hope that the software would get it across the internet and it would sound something like what I had intended.
When I started a company called Fringeware, in 91 or 92, let's see, this is a cover of Fringeware Review, which was a magazine that we published, a zine at the time. And we had our own news group, alt.fringeware. I can't remember what we had to do to set that up. There was some protocol for getting something set up, and you sort of had to justify yourself and so forth. But at the time, our original idea of Fringeware was that there were a lot of people who were like developing little bits of technology that they couldn't really bring to market very well, that they couldn't overcome the expense of bringing things to market. And we thought, wow, well, we could give people a way to sell their wares on the internet. And it turns out that you couldn't really do that, because when we went to our bank and said, we need to be able to accept credit cards because we're going to start selling products over the internet. And they said, you can't do that. They said, you can't, there's no way that you can secure the transaction.
Yeah, you experienced what the cannabis industry is still experiencing, is if they don't like the business you're in, you can't get there.
Well, really, they had a valid concern. They didn't want people sending their credit card information in plain text over the internet. That could have been problematic. And that's why secure socket layers, or SSL, was developed. And that's how people do it now. But we didn't have that at the time. And actually my genius partner, Paco, could have developed it. He understood encryption, and he could have come up with a way to encrypt those transactions. But they didn't know what our capabilities were, and they didn't really trust us to do that. So we couldn't really set up e-commerce. And there we were thinking about, we would have been real pioneers if we had been able to set it up.
I was able to do that for I did a website for a Northern California fair district. They did a county fair in far Northern California. My friend was the CEO of the fair, and she asked me to put something together where they could sell the tickets to their entertainment during their fair, sell tickets. And they couldn't afford, any encryption stuff. I just hacked together all these pieces of using multiple mailboxes, and people would email their stuff to this one mailbox, and it was all cut apart, sent to different mailboxes, and reassembled at the offices. It was very strange and clunky, but it worked, and there was never no one ever got ripped off. We sold tens of thousands of tickets.
We had, so we were setting up an email list, and, you'd think you might go out and find some software to do that. But Paco Nathan, my partner, like I say, was kind of a genius, and he just sat down and pored over the manuals for the SendMail system, and figured out how to build a listserv. So we had a custom listserv that he had built for us.
Nice.
Yeah. And we had something called the Fringeware email list that was pretty popular there for a while. But that was, how many years ago was that?
More than I want to count.
That would be like 30 years ago, 3 decades.
Yike.
A long time ago.
Our younger viewers will be sitting there scratching their heads and say, what the hell are these old dudes talking about? That's like cave paintings. They're beating sticks together to communicate. It was sort of that way, but it was sure a lot of fun in the early days.
It was. It's probably fun now in different ways for different people, even though the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket.
Hell's the place to be, according to AC/DC, anyway. Anyway, it's been a wonderful time, John. That was a great presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I sniping because, I'm not one to sit around and just be quiet and watch.
What are we going to do next week?
More of the same.
Okay.
But different.
All right. Oh, we're not going to do it next week.
Oh, your muffin's ready. Or is that your...
We can't do it next week. It's Thanksgiving.
Oh, we're taking it. Okay, folks, we'll see you after Thanksgiving.
That's right. We're taking Thanksgiving off. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
I'll be 10 pounds heavier.
Ha! I'd be lucky if that's all I am. All right. I'll see you later.